your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, Happy New Year, and thanks for joining us for our first weekend edition of 2023. The Alberta government suspended its provincial fuel tax on New Year's Day. The province currently has some of the cheapest gas prices in the country. The president of the Canadians for Affordable Energy, Dan McTeague, tells us if we can expect those lower numbers to continue.
Prices have gone up on the wholesale price on the market in Chicago. So we've seen in the past 2 weeks gasoline go up 20 cents a liter. So I think $1.05 to $1.10 might be a little bit of wishful thinking. Generally speaking, it costs most gas stations here in Lethbridge and Bridge City about $1.20 to buy their fuel, maybe even $1.22 or $1.23, even after the provincial government's tax decrease. All in all, if you can get it for $1.20, it's probably as good as it's going to get for the foreseeable future.
According to GasBuddy.com, the cheapest fuel in the province as of Friday morning is in Rocky Mountain House at 107.9 per liter. We've spoken about the increase of residents in Alberta as more and more people have been moving to the province, and a lot of it has to do with the government's Alberta is Calling campaign. Now, according to Stats Canada, our country as a whole also saw an increase of more than 362,000 people from July of last year. That was the highest quarterly population growth rate since the second quarter of 1957. Our population is now close to 39.3 million people. The agency says we expect to reach over 40 million by the end of 2023. The president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms was arrested in Calgary on December 30th and is facing charges that include attempting to obstruct justice. Police say it was in connection with a 2021 incident into an alleged attempt to intimidate a Winnipeg judge. John Carpe was arrested with the assistance of Calgary police based on a Canada-wide warrant with charges issued by Manitoba Justice. He has since been released and will appear in court February 21st in Winnipeg. John Carpe joined BCN's Hal Roberts from Calgary earlier this week to discuss the experience.
So, John, this is your first time in jail. Talk about that experience.
It was miserable. It was unpleasant. It was uncomfortable. I was in a cell and just concrete only. There was no cot, no mattress, no pillow, no blanket. And I was in there for 23 hours. So I didn't get much sleep because no matter what position you lie down on, unless you're used to sleeping on concrete every night, it's pretty uncomfortable.
Now, John, you temporarily stepped aside as president of the Justice Centre after you admitted in July of 2021 that you hired a private investigator to tail or track Chief Justice Glenn Joyal. Now, you apologized to the judge. Wasn't that enough? Shouldn't this be case closed?
Baffled with these 17 months after the fact. I suddenly get a phone call from Calgary Police Service saying there's a Canada-wide warrant out for my arrest and that there's criminal charges. I was just shocked. I put all my cards on the table in court on July 12th, 2021. I apologized to the judge. That was reported on by media. It was an open public court hearing. I accepted full responsibility for my decision to include this judge with other government officials. The whole purpose was to see whether these government officials are complying with COVID restrictions that they are imposing on the rest of the population.
Judge Joyal at the time was hearing a case involving 7 Manitoba churches represented by you in the Justice Centre. Now, you were challenging COVID-19 public health orders. Where do these cases stand at this point in time?
So the judge ruled against the churches, and he ruled in favor of the government's COVID restrictions. And then that decision has been appealed, and it was recently heard in December by the Manitoba Court of Appeal. And so we're expecting a decision sometime in 2023, hopefully reversing the trial judge.
Thanks so much for your time, John. That was John Carpe, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining us from Calgary.
Vulcan Industrial of Houston, Texas is adding a location north of Grand Prairie as it grows its business in that region of Alberta. The facility will provide products to support Alberta's growing fracking industry in the area. The company has experienced a recent increase in business within northern Alberta's oil and gas sector and hopes to increase its support for the industry. Up next, I host a panel discussion where we break down 2022's most noteworthy headlines. After the break, I'll be joined by MLA Drew Barnes, editor Dave Naylor, and political analyst and speechwriter Nigel Hannaford for a look back at 22 and what's expected in 23. That's next. Keep it right here.
People are restless, and they are expressing that through politicians who they perceive to be authentic, who are listening to them.
Yeah, 2022 has been an interesting year. There's been a regime change in Alberta, party elections, angry words, lots of Twitter posts, and hurt feelings. So to talk more about the news and politics of the year in Alberta, we've assembled a trifecta of learned and opinionated Albertans. Joining us today from the Western Standard is both editor Dave Naylor and political analyst Nigel Hannaford, who was Stephen Harper's former speechwriter. And we also have independent MLA Drew Barnes from Medicine Hat. Gentlemen, welcome to our panel. Great to have you all here today.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Never been called before.
Okay, so much has happened this year. It's hard to know where to start. So Dave Naylor, why don't we start with you? Can you give us your top news headlines from 2022?
Well, if it was a Time magazine cover, I think, Jeanette, it would be Danielle Smith, Woman of the Year. This is a woman who in just a matter of weeks went from deciding to get back into politics and run as a local MLA to saying, hey, if the top job became open, I may take a run at it, to in fact taking a run at it and winning and becoming Alberta Premier, all in the matter of a few months. So an astonishing rise to power. So she would get my vote for the newsmaker of 2022.
Wow. Okay. So MLA Drew Barnes, what about you? What stood out most to you this year?
Well, I would pick the convoys, the Freedom Convoy, Tamara Leach, and the brave truckers, the people that stepped up and led such a strong, peaceful, and legal protest. Of course, right here in Alberta at home, Coots. I went down to Coots one afternoon, and what a family party atmosphere. Everywhere you went, it was, hey, come for a hot dog, come for a hot chocolate, here's a brownie. So to me, that was the instigator. Certainly, Dave has a point with Premier Smith, her incredible political comeback. But without the Freedom Convoy, without the people that stepped up to fight for our freedoms, and without Jason Kenney so badly not meeting expectations, she wouldn't have had that opportunity.
Okay, yeah, we're definitely going to get into the Freedom Convoy and the Coots border blockade later on in the segment. But Nigel Hannaford, when you look back at 2022, what do you take away from this past year?
Well, I think certainly, Jeanette, that both of those are worthy placements for best story of the year, most important event. You have to put them together also with the elevation of Pierre Poilievre to leader of the opposition. I think that there's a common theme here, that people are restless, and they are expressing that through politicians who they perceive to be authentic, who are listening to them. And the significance of the convoy also is that people are ready to let the federal government know that they can't assume they can do whatever they like. So there's a mood in the country, and it's perhaps the mood that is the story.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we of course definitely need to stir things up a little bit and talk about the Sovereignty Act, and of course, you were also mentioning Danielle Smith. So cutting all the talking points clutter aside, Drew Barnes, let's start with you. What's your take on this piece of legislation? Does it get a passing grade from the people in your riding of Medicine Hat?
Oh, well, it would get a B or a C only. Cypress Medicine Hatters so much want to step up, fight for their freedom, demand economic freedom and personal freedom again from their governments, particularly Ottawa. The Sovereignty Act, though, two things. It's a bit misguided. You know, to keep Ottawa in its jurisdiction, there's other ways to challenge them for that. Secondly, I think the Smith government missed a chance to amend the law to where it could be more transparent, more in the open of the legislature. Anytime they direct a provincial entity like a municipality or a bank like ATB, that should be in the full light of the legislature where everyone can see. Cypress Medicine Hatters realize that the only way that we're going to get more autonomy and more fairness from Ottawa is if we do the things that count. And those are our own police force, collect our own taxes, have our own pension plan, more control over our immigration. And we so want to stay in Canada, but we so want a fair deal for our families and communities. And that might mean an independence referendum someday.
Okay, we do need to take a quick break, but we will get right back to this question as soon as we return. We'll talk more about Alberta's Sovereignty Act in a united Canada. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our panel, continuing to talk about the Sovereignty Act inside a united Canada. Dave Naylor from the Western Standard, you get your word in on this one here since we missed it before the break. So when you investigate the details of the act, do you think that this will be useful to Albertans?
Well, I don't think it can hurt, right? I mean, I think Albertans only want what people in Quebec have had for decades, and you know, nobody seems upset when it happens in Quebec, but as soon as Alberta raises it, you know, the Laurentian elites go bananas. You know, when I'm in my local pub, it's really not on the you know, number one on the list, but it's, you know, it's certainly going to be a very handy tool to for Premier Smith to have in her toolbox. And you know, when we had Jason Kenney, we were promised a fight with Ottawa, and we never got it. And you know, Danielle Smith was elected saying she was going to fight. So at least we're starting to see a little bit of movement on that front, Jeanette.
Nigel, when you look at all the media and political he said, she said going around, what's your take on the Sovereignty Act?
Well, I'm all for it. I think that you have to have a reasoned and a mechanism to push back against Ottawa. She uses the phrase when Ottawa gets out of its lane, and it's a very useful lane. Anybody who's ever been sideswiped on the highway knows what that means. And there is a real sense that Ottawa is trying to command and control areas that are strongly provincial jurisdiction, most significantly with respect to the energy industry, but latterly we've heard federal ambitions to control even how much fertilizer the farmers put on their fields. These are things where the province needs to be the defender of the people of the province. And if it takes a Sovereignty Act to actually get everybody pointed in the same direction, so be it. Use the Constitution to demand the rights that the provinces were given in 1867.
So it appears that the NDP are looking for any advantage and the opportunity to bring their socialist style of policies and politics to Alberta. So Dave, would this be something Albertans can afford? And what's your honest take on round two for Alberta with Rachel Notley as our premier?
Well, it's, you know, a lot has to happen before, you know, before that, Jeanette. I mean, the current polls have the UCP back out in front, but it is neck and neck. I think the next few months are going to be absolutely fascinating to watch, because I think you've really got two leaders that really don't like each other. And you know, the NDP is already in election mode. They've got press releases coming out on a daily basis. They've got press releases coming out after every UCP release. You know, and the UCP is trying to take away as much of their breathing room as they can by handing out millions and millions of dollars to various, you know, groups that need it, and food bank and stuff like that. But you know, I can't wait for the writ to drop. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, well, I mean, today's point, I mean, you would certainly expect any opposition party to do exactly what the NDP is doing if they are well funded and have plenty of supporters, stakeholders, as they would call them, who can join in the chorus. But I think what Premier Smith has done so far, and we'll have to see how it works out, but she has very much tied her fortunes to making improvements that ordinary people who don't really, they care about the Sovereignty Act, but in the end, they care more about whether they can get themselves into hospital or somebody they care about into hospital. They care about crime on the subways and crime on the street, the homeless difficulties, and Smith seems to be taking those on. Now, it's going to see. Her fortune is going to depend on whether she can do what she says she is going to do. She has said publicly within the last week that there are 69,000 people waiting for surgeries in Alberta right now. If that number is way down in May of next year, I would say she has a good case to go to the voters and say, reward me for that. If not, well, I have to see what happens. But she's putting her emphasis on the things that matter to ordinary people, even though there's been a lot of talk about fairly elevated political theories.
Okay, we do need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll certainly return to this subject as well as talking about healthcare and education. Welcome back to our panel here on Alberta Weekly. During the last segment, we got to hear from Drew from Dave rather, and from Nigel. We would like to have Drew Barnes weigh in now. Drew, have you obviously have an important view of the political landscape. So are Albertans winning or losing right now with how the UCP has been operating? And of course, we were talking a little bit about Rachel Notley versus Danielle in the upcoming election.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Albertans are winning because there's choice out there, and Albertans are going to win in even further. Dave Naylor's point about the competitiveness between Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith, I believe is true and is there. Do we read anything into the fact that Premier Smith didn't show up when it was time to unveil past Premier Notley's portrait? I mean, that's maybe an indicator. But the two parties are virtually tied in the polls. We haven't seen that since Ralph Klein ran against Lawrence Decore in the early 90s when Alberta was in debt, Premier Getty had overspent, and it was time for real change, and Albertans stepped up. So we're in an election that could maybe come out tied. So I look at some of these third parties that have been out there and have floundered. If somebody can maybe fill a void there might be an opportunity for more ideas to be presented for Albertans, and maybe even the balance of power to be gained. When I talk to Cypress Medicine Hatters about Premier Smith so far, to be frank, they're a little disappointed. There's still a lot of positivity and hope that she'll meet her expectations in her promises, but they feel that she did water the Sovereignty Act down a bit. They feel that her backing away on the Human Rights Act protection for vaccination status, the fact that she abandoned that, is a cause for concern. And Jeanette, a lot of Cypress Medicine Hatters and Albertans are really hoping for tax cuts. They know that anytime the government puts this money out, it's just inflationary. And, of course, there's no free lunches. The government wrote all kinds of checks during COVID, and now interest rates have quadrupled, and we're paying the price for that. So here we have governments doing it again. Manitoba and Saskatchewan have already eliminated their 2% small business tax. What we should do in Alberta is raise our personal exemption so no Albertan starts paying tax to past $25,000 income. We should get back to our 10% flat tax. We're blessed with $28 billion this year in oil and gas royalties. Let's put that money directly, or as much as we can, into Albertans' pockets. And I believe if Premier Smith would do that, like Ron DeSantis in Florida, she'd be rewarded by the voters.
Okay, all right. So moving along here, education and healthcare, two massive expenditures for the province. Some want to spend and manage a larger workforce in these two sectors. So others feel that we can't keep doing the same things and expect different results. So they obviously want to see some change. So Nigel, what would your opinion be if Alberta instituted a voucher system for healthcare and education? This has obviously been a topic of discussion for years.
I think that would be a huge step forward for a lot of people. You know, one of the problems with, well, let's take healthcare before we take education. One of the problems with healthcare is that when you show up at a hospital, you are a cost because the hospitals are funded according to a per capita ratio. So if there's 1 million people, you get 1 million times what is the amount, and you've got to work with that. So when somebody comes to your door, they represent a cost, but not a revenue source. Give that same person a voucher, and they can go to this hospital or that hospital. You have a very different reception at the front door. That's put it very simply. That's kind of what a voucher system allows you to do.
Dave Naylor, where are you on this issue? What would be the best case scenario in education, or maybe how Smith and the UCP can keep these two systems afloat?
Well, I think Premier Smith has hitched her electoral wagon to the healthcare system, and that's what needs fixing. And, you know, let's face it, it's not just Alberta. Healthcare is in a crisis across the country. The feds and the provinces just can't get together, it seems, on spending more money. So we've got to look at different ways of funding the healthcare system. We've got to get the waiting list down, as Nigel says. We've got to get, you know, if I take somebody into the emergency room, I don't want to sit there for 16 hours till I'm treated. If Premier Smith can take some small steps in tackling that and maybe finding different ways to tackling that, then I think she's got a chance for re-election. If the healthcare system is the same mess as it is now come May, I think that may give Premier Notley Part 2 an in.
Okay, we do need to take a quick break, but when we return, we will get to Drew on this. So give him the last word on this. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to our Alberta panel, Alberta Weekly panel here. So we ended up talking about a voucher system for healthcare and education. Drew, we're going to give you the last word on this one. So we know that you're for freedom of choice. So can you give us your insight on why a voucher system for healthcare and education may or may not be the best policy going forward?
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, Albertans know healthcare is too expensive. We're 26 billion a year we're spending now. It is so broken, ambulance times and wait times, and we have slipped so much in our education system. I mean, I heard the story the other day about a surgeon and a patient that flew out from Calgary to BC to use the operating room together because according to the Canadian Health Act, ridiculously, you can't do that. You couldn't operate in Calgary. It's just craziness. 3 things we got to do first, though. We have to train a whole bunch more Alberta kids to be doctors and nurse practitioners. We need to fill that hole. Secondly, we need a proper IT system, a computer system, so we can track what's costing us now in the system, where our superior outcomes to our inferior outcomes, so we can start to work and put those things together. And third, the patient has to be a little more conscious of what the system costs. I think every time you use a healthcare service in Alberta, you should sign a bill, not pay for it, but you should sign a bill so you know what it costs. Publicly funded, let's start to put some accountability in it. And then as Nigel and Dave said, then let's start to give patients as much choice as we can, publicly funded.
Since the start of 2022, the Canadian protests and freedom rallies were something not seen before in Canada. So Freedom Corp, the group representing the leaders of the Freedom Rally in Ottawa, claimed that the Government of Canada planned a false narrative against protesters before the protesters even got to Ottawa. So Nigel, did you have an opportunity to visit any of the protest sites, and were these protests effective in your opinion?
Sadly, I didn't go to any of the sites. I say sadly, as a former trucker, I felt I ought to have been there, but circumstances didn't work that way for me. With respect to whether they were effective or not, yes, absolutely they were effective. It caused the federal government to just stop and say, maybe we can't just push people around. And we've had this inquiry since then where so much has been exposed that was devious, manipulative, and places the Liberal government in a very poor light. I think people have finally seen through what the game plan is, and I totally credit the trucker movement for that.
Okay. Drew Barnes, I believe that you visited the Coutts border during this time. What did you see when you were there, and what was your opinion of the situation?
Oh, thank you. What a family atmosphere. There must have been 10,000 people there. Everything was peaceful and pleasant, and everybody was having a good time. Everywhere I went, people were calling, "Hey, come have a hot dog. We got a hot chocolate for you." It was really peaceful and good and effective. Scott Moe realized instantly when the Coutts border happened in Ottawa that if he didn't release some of the mandates, that he was going to have convoys all throughout Saskatchewan. So Scott Moe was the first one to react. And look at the difference. Premier Moe removed some mandates. Jason Kenney phoned for military help. Scott Moe won re-election, and Premier Kenney's on to a new career.
And Dave Naylor, we had a wide breadth of opinions from across the country on these protesting events. So what did you think of the protests at these locations?
Well, I think they were very effective. And I think, as Nigel's talked about, the public inquiry has just shown what a sham it was for the Emergencies Act to even be brought in. The Minister of Lies, Mendocino, it was 13, 14 times. He said in the House that police had asked him or demanded from him the Emergencies Act, and he was shown that no, that was not the truth. Courts across the country have been dropping charges for people that from pastors to people taking parts in weekend rallies in various cities. So yes, the effect has been huge.
Wow, absolutely. And gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. Unfortunately, we could go on and on, but we thank you for being here, for sharing your views and your expertise with our viewers. And we're sure that 2023 could be a battle like no other. What side will the people of Alberta choose? Well, that will be up to you, our viewers, to decide. The outcome of 2023 is up to you. Well, up next, a discussion about what 2023 looks like for Alberta's farmers and our food sources in light of new taxes and the green agenda. Keep it right here.